Historical Comparative Research, reported by Jorel Capulong, Jonah Palencia, and Jansen Martinez. What is historical comparative research? A collection of research techniques and approaches that puts historical time or cross-cultural variation at the center of research, that treats what is studied as part of the flow of history and situates it in a cultural context.
This is a kind of approach or method that studies historical events that can affect the cultural context of the society.
On the history of historical comparative research, the 19th century founders of sociology conducted HC research, and they are Emile Durkheim, Max Weber, and Karl Marx. During World War I and the 1950s, only few sociologists conducted HC research because most of them used positivism and field research. Historical research had its return during the 1960s. 1970s was when HC research grew bigger when several books became models on how to do historical comparative research. During the 1980s, HC grew into a vital force because a section of historical comparative sociology was formed in the American Sociological Association on 1983. During this time, Melvin Kahn was the president of ASA. 1990 onwards, 40% of the articles published in the most prestigious U.S. sociology journals were historical or comparative in some sense, according to Newman.
Historical comparative research can answer big questions such as how can societal change take place and what caused its revolution. Another is what fundamental features are common to most societies.
Next is the logic of historical comparative research. Historical comparative research can be organized into three dimensions. First, does the researcher focus on what occurs in one, several, to many nations? There are historical events happened in one place to another. Next is how does the researcher involve time or history? Does the focus time involve past, across time, or present? Is the researcher's analysis based on quantitative or qualitative data? There are similarities between field research and historical comparative research. First, both recognizes that the researcher's point of view is an unavoidable part of research. Both examine a great diversity of data. Another is that both often use grounded theory, which occurs during the process of data collection. Grounded theory are the concepts emerged from analytic problem of history, ordering the past into structures, conjunctures, and events. Also, it involves a type of translation. Translation meaning once the life, language, and perspective of the people being studied have been mastered, the researcher translates it for others who read his or her report. Last, focus on action, process, and sequence, and see time and process as essential.
Steps in a historical comparative research. Just like the first step on writing a research paper called deciding on a topic, a historical researcher begins by conceptualizing the object of inquiry. The researcher must be familiar with the setting and conceptualize the study. To do this, the researcher conducts an orientation reading or reading of general works to grasp a specific setting and organize concepts and develop questions to ask. The second step is locating the evidence. A researcher locates and gathers evidence through extensive bibliographic work. The researcher uses many indexes, catalogs, and reference work that lists what libraries contain. The researcher spends weeks in searching for sources in libraries, travels to several specialized research libraries, and spends months or years reading books and articles. After locating evidence, a historical comparative researcher evaluates the evidence by asking two questions. First is how relevant is the evidence to emerging research questions and evolving concepts. Second is how accurate and strong is the evidence. However, the question of relevance is a difficult one since the focus of research shifts. Evidence that was not relevant can become relevant and may stimulate new avenues of inquiry. Then, when the researcher gathers evidence and locates new sources, the researcher begins to organize the data. The researcher does a preliminary analysis by noting generalizations and themes and uses a theoretical insight to develop new concepts by critically evaluating the evidence based on theory. The next step is the process of synthesizing evidence. The researcher refines concepts and moves toward a general explanatory model after most of the evidence is in. Old themes or concepts are revised and new ones are created. Concrete events give meaning to concepts. The researcher looks for patterns across time or units and draws out similarities and differences with analogies. He or she organizes divergent events into sequences and groups them together to create a larger picture. The last step is to combine evidence, concepts, and synthesis into a research report. The way in which the report is written is key in historical comparative research. Assembling evidence, arguments, and conclusions into a report is always a crucial step. The careful crafting of evidence and explanation makes or breaks historical comparative research. The researcher weaves together evidence and arguments to communicate a coherent, convincing picture to readers. To give a recap in historical comparative research writing, these are the steps. First, conceptualizing the object of inquiry. Second, locating evidence. Third, evaluating the quality of evidence. Fourth, organizing evidence. Fifth, synthesizing. And lastly, writing a report. Primary sources are images and artifacts that provides evidence about the past. These are documents that gets us as closer as possible to what actually happened during a historical event. The examples are old letters, old photos, clothes, memos. Primary sources also involves movies, old newspapers, novels, articles of clothing, photographs, and so forth of those who lived in the past and have survived to the present. They are found mostly in archives or a place where documents are stored, in private collections, in family closets, or in museums. Secondary sources are the writings of historians who have spent years studying primary sources. Another type of historical evidence are running records. These running records consist of files or existing statistical documents maintained by organizations. Another are recollections. Recollections are the statements or writings of individuals about their past lives or experiences based on memory. This can be in the form of memoirs, autobiographies, or interviews. Once the documents or other primary sources are located, the researcher evaluates them by subjecting them to external and internal criticism. External criticism means you evaluate the authenticity of a document itself to be certain that it is not a fake or a forgery. Criticism involves asking, was the document created when it is claimed to have been, in the place where it was supposed to be, and by the person who claims to be the author? Why was the document produced to begin with, and how did it survive? Once the document passes as being authentic, you use internal criticism, an examination of the document's contents to establish credibility. You evaluate whether what is recorded was based on what the author directly witnessed or is second-hand information. This requires examining both the literal meaning of what is recorded and the subtle connotations or intentions. You note other event sources or people mentioned in the document and ask whether they can be verified.
Comparative research. The focus of comparative research is the comparison of units of research which include interactions, social meanings, contexts, social actions, and cultural groups. The examination of two or more contrasting cases can be used to highlight differences and similarities between them, leading to a better understanding of social phenomena. What are the strengths of comparative research? First, it may reveal concepts that can be used for theory building. And second, comparative research can eliminate or offer alternative explanations for causal relationships. The following are limitations of comparative research. Comparative research is more difficult, more costly, and more time-consuming than research that is not comparative. Comparative researchers can rarely use random sampling. Comparative researchers can apply, not test, theory, and can make only limited generalizations.
Comparative research focuses on the comparison of units of research which include social interactions, social meanings and contexts, social actions, and cultural groups.
There are 4 types of historical comparative research. A case study comparative research compares particular societies and cultural units and does not make broad generalizations. A cultural context research studies cases that are surrogates for types of societies or units. A cross-national research measures variables across many nations. And the transnational research, which is a special type of comparative research in which a researcher uses a multi-nation unit such as a region of the globe. The following are problems with historical comparative data. The courtesy bias. When very strong cultural norms cause respondents to hide unpleasant or give answers that the respondent thinks that the interviewer wants. Respondents may seriously understate or overstate some characteristics because of cultural norms. The Western cultural bias. A bias in comparative research that is organized around the outlook and perspective of advanced Western societies that is largely insensitive to local, non-Western cultural issues, values, or perspectives. The inverted focus problem. United States social science is criticized for being inverted or too self-centered. Unfortunately, many researchers only see concerns from the viewpoint of their own cultural values and beliefs, citing only research that was conducted in the United States. Equivalence in historical comparative research.
It is then the task of the researcher to determine which concept could be measured, compared, and is researchable across cultures and historical periods. Without equivalence, the researcher cannot use the same concept across cultures and historical periods.
There are 4 types of equivalence. Lexicon equivalence. Lexicon equivalence is the correct translation of words and phrases, or finding a word that means the same thing as another word. Lexicon equivalence can be significant in historical research because the meaning of words changes over time, even in a language. Contextual equivalence. Contextual equivalence is the correct application of terms or concepts in different social or historical contexts. It is an attempt to achieve equivalence within specific contexts. Conceptual equivalence. Conceptual equivalence is the ability to use the same concept across divergent cultures or historical eras. Researchers may try to stretch their concepts by learning about other cultures or eras, but their views of other cultures or eras are colored by their current life situations. Measurement equivalence. Measurement equivalents are the equal measures of the same concept in different settings. If a researcher develops a concept appropriate to different contexts, the question remains, are different measures necessary in different contexts for the same concept?
These are the examples of HC research studies.